Well, hello everybody. Pastor James here. I hope you're doing well, that you survived Christmas, that you've gotten into 2022 okay, that you haven't been dragged in kicking and screaming. But here we are. We're in a new year, and it's a time to start new things. And one of those new things that we're starting as a church family together is posting these videos on YouTube and on our Facebook page on Sunday nights, where we're exploring what it means to reach out to the different generations of people that we see around us each and every day. In fact, the book that we're going to be using for this study as a kind of baseline, I'm going to be adding my own sort of flavor to this and some things that I picked up from my own experiences over the years. But the book that we're going to be using as a baseline is called Effective Generational Ministry. It's by Elizabeth Nesbitt Sabanato and Craig Blomberg. You can easily find this on Amazon or maybe even at the store, at the Christian bookstore. But it's a great little guidebook. As you can see, I'm about halfway through it, and just really enjoying this book. It was recommended from a friend of mine. And I found it to be really well done, and a lot of research and a lot of data that's helpful that's in there. But we're going to use this book as kind of a baseline for us, as a jumping off, as a diving board into more specific areas on how we can, as a church and as individuals, do outreach, live on mission, and live evangelistically in 2022. In fact, this study, let me tell you what this study is and what it's not. This study is not intended to be something that is meant for you and me to try to go manipulate or coerce people of certain generations to come into our church. That's not what we are intending to do. This study is, however, look at it as a way to equip you to be on mission to the different people that you come into contact with each and every day. Now, do we want people to come to our church? Absolutely. Do we want people to be involved in a church family? Absolutely. We think that's biblical, and we welcome that. So we're not discouraging you from saying, hey, don't get people to come to church. But what we're talking about here is not using a study to find some sort of methodology for grabbing people and bringing them into the church. What we're talking about here is not a come here strategy. It's about a go out there strategy. Go out and reach people in the ways of Jesus, to be on mission. In fact, that's a great word to use for this study, mission and being on mission, because missionaries, when it comes right down to it, right before they get on the mission field, so to speak, they do something that's called cultural exegesis. Now, that's the first big seminary theology term for you to learn tonight. In fact, I'm going to write that one down. This is something that missionaries do before they really go out and start to reach people. And you say, well, James, that is a really weird term. I have no idea what that means. All right, here's what it means. Has to do with culture, obviously. Now, what's exegesis? That's just a fancy word that means to draw out an understanding, not to read into our understanding into a culture, but to draw out, to seek, actual understanding of the people who are around you and the cultures that you're going to be involved with. And one thing that this book does really well, and it's a concept that I'd never really thought about before, but it's the idea that the generations around us, right? The boomers, the millennials, the Gen Xers, the Gen Zers, these people groups are not just a part of American culture, but they are actually cultures in and of themselves. In other words, I, as a Gen Xer, I'm a part of the Gen X culture, right? And I'm actually pretty proud of that. I like Gen Xers. I get along really well with them. I understand them and what makes them tick, right? But some baby boomers I don't understand. Some millennials I don't understand. It's because I don't know the culture well enough. And so when we begin to understand the culture of these specific groups, these age groups and generations, then we begin to draw out methods of how they learn, how they behave, how they even talk to one another. Because believe it or not, generations have their own languages. We all speak English, but different generations speak different language. For instance, if you are a boomer, you know what the phrase far out means, right? And as a Gen Xer, I kind of know what that means, but for me, it's more of like something's way off in the distance. It doesn't mean like mind-blowing or something. We have all of these languages and idioms and terminologies that we use that are distinctive to our culture. So as missionaries, we need to look at the different generations as cultural groups that before we get on that mission field, we learn to understand what makes these folks tick, all right? How am I going to spread the gospel in a culturally understandable way? Now, I'm shying away from using the word relevant. That's an overused term today. How can I make the gospel culturally relevant? Usually that's a term that's just used to mean how can I kind of dumb down the gospel so that I can coerce people into following my way of doing things. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about making the gospel of Jesus Christ understandable to the different cultural groups that are alive and well today in our American culture, and especially within about a 10-minute drive from West Oakwoods Baptist Church campus here in South Austin, Texas. All right, so how do we do that? Where's the beginning point? How in the world do we get to pull out of the culture those traits and understand those things to understand better how to minister to people? All right, well, the first thing that we really need to do is ask the question and then answer it accordingly. But the question is, what is culture? All right, if I'm going to get to know generations of people as specific cultural groups, well, what do we mean when we use the term culture? That's a word that's thrown around a lot in our day and time, and we kind of think we know what it means, but what exactly does the word culture mean? Well, I'm going to take a definition from a sociologist, an ethicist, and a theologian who lived about 50 to 100 years ago. His name was Richard Niebuhr. He wrote a great book called Christ and Culture. It's still a classic and relevant even today to our faith. But he says that culture is the total process of human activity in a given area. All right, that's a big definition, but it's the total process of human activity in a given area. Human activity as far as language, we just talked about that. Habits of certain groups of people as they congregate together. Cultures have habits, right? Beliefs. Cultures have different beliefs, don't they? Baby boomers believe a lot differently than some Gen Zers today. Gen Xers believe in some things that are much different even than millennials, even though there's not much of an age gap between those two generations. So that's a part of our culture as well. There's something also called confirmation bias. Now, here's another big term for you to learn tonight. Go look this one up. That was coined by a sociologist a long time ago by the name of Peter Berger, and it was picked up by Christian missionaries in about the late 20th century. But confirmation bias is a culture's way of manipulating information to suit their own ends. All right, to suit their own narratives. You see this all the time on social media. People in different cultural groups take information and data and spin it in a way to suit their own ends. Think CNN versus Fox News. All right, that's very clear. Confirmation bias is happening there. There's two cultures that are trying to work out substantive arguments and debates about any given truth in our society today. And when you also add into the mix the prevalent belief in our society now that there really is no such thing as truth, then that just really knocks everything else in the head, right? Doesn't it? So we've got that to contend with as well. But cultures are the total process of human activity: language, beliefs, confirmation bias. And then one other really big term that I'm going to lay on you tonight is called plausibility structure. Now, you don't have to, there's no test on this. You don't have to do anything about that, except you can use it and sound really smart to your friends if you want to do that. But what that is that cultures have different structures that they use to dictate what is acceptable behavior and what is unacceptable behavior. All right, different cultural groups have very marked differences about what is acceptable and unacceptable. And you really saw that between what is called the silent generation, which was people born basically before 1945, and the baby boomers. All right, the silent generation is who they were called, or the builders, sometimes they're called, or even the greatest generation, because they went through the Depression and Nazism and World War II and defeated all of that. So you have some belief systems that were very important to the builders and the silent generation, the greatest generation, that the baby boomers decided we don't believe that anymore, and we are totally going to go against that. All right, and you had that huge generation gap open up in the 1960s. All right, that's what we're talking about when we use a term like plausibility structure. It simply means different cultures have ways that they sort of dictate. The group, the majority, the popular people in charge, all right, they dictate to the rest of the group, this is how you're supposed to think, and this is how you're supposed to act. Another term that we can use there, it's called the spirit of the age, right? The spirit of the age, it just feels right. You know, we know this is right because it's in the air and it just feels right, all right? That's, when you deal with something like that, we just know it's right. That is what we call a plausibility structure. Whew, all right, did you get all that? Okay, I hope you did. If not, that's the beauty of these videos. You can go back and rewind it, or you can just shut it off however you want to do that. All right, so let's keep going then. This is basically introductory material tonight, but I wanted to make sure that you knew what is culture. Now, another part of that is important for us in this study moving forward is going to be an intensive look at the different cultural traits, we're going to call them, of the generations that are essentially very active in American culture, contemporary culture today, the people to whom we are on mission. And specifically, we're going to talk mostly about three groups. Now, there are really 5 generations of people who are very active in our culture today. A lot of generations. In fact, I've never seen any research done on this, but I think it's pretty safe to say that this is the largest number of generational groups that we've had in America in some time. People have been living longer, therefore we have more generations, okay? So we're going to talk about 3 in particular, but I want to mention 2 other in a cursory sense. Now, that first I just mentioned is the builders, or the silent generation, or the greatest generation. They go by a lot of names. These were people who were born basically between about 1920 and 1945. The Great Depression, they lived with the fallout of World War I and had to pick up with World War II, fought down Nazism and fascism. That generation came home, built America into a huge economic machine, that sort of thing. So that's the first generation. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time with that generation. We're going to focus more on the next 3. So we've got this next one, which is the second one, is the baby boomers. These are the people who were born between 1946 and roughly 1964. We're using kind of rough terms here of dates, but you get the idea. So basically between 1946 and 1964, you have the baby boomer generation. And after them came my generation, Generation X. These were people who were born between 1965 and 1981. I'm on the back end of that, but I'm a Gen Xer. I fit all those stereotypes and categories. That's me. All right, that's my culture, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Then next we have the Millennials, who are very much talked about today because these are the younger adults who are really rising now to the positions of power and leadership in the general American culture. All right, they are people born from basically 1982 to 2001, and that's why they're called millennials. They were born near the turn of the millennium, and this is the generation that is very techy now. They came with all the technical devices were developed in their lifetime. 9/11 had a huge impact on them, and some other things that we'll talk about in later episodes. And then we don't want to forget, lastly, about the generation that's called Generation Z or Gen Zers. These are folks who were born after 2002, roughly to the present. And so we're just now beginning to see Gen Zers rise up into middle school, high school, and begin to start college. And they will soon be making a name for themselves as they enter especially into the job market, which is the economic engine. Says a lot about generational feelings and belief systems and language and that sort of thing. So we'll get a little bit to them, but specifically we want to focus on baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials. Now, what are we going to do then in talking about these different generations? Well, we're going to do some of this right here. We're going to read out some different traits that are specific to these cultures in an effort to better understand them and then to minister to them. Now, there's and I want to put a disclaimer on here. We don't want to get into stereotypes in this series, so I'm going to try my very best to shy away from that. I'm just going to talk about traits of these cultures, like the language and some popular language that's used in these groups. We're going to talk about their habits, their beliefs. We're going to talk a little bit about the confirmation bias, the narratives, and also the structures that are held up by the people in power in these generations to say, here's what you really need to believe and here's what you need to discard. So we're going to talk a lot about that, and then we're going to show how the church can come up alongside these generations and present the gospel in a way that appreciates and understands their culture. How exactly we're going to do that? Well, we're going to look at their traits, but we're also wanting to look at more of a broad scope. We're going to look at the macro level instead of just the micro level, because we don't want to be a church that's just a one generation church. You know, there's been a big movement in churches over the past, I would say 20 to 30 to even 40 years that have said, you know, we are kind of specifically concentrating on baby boomers. We're really reaching them. Or this church has come along and said, well, we're picking up where baby boomers left off and where they discarded some people. So we're mostly going to focus on Gen Xers, or we're mostly going to focus on millennials. And so we get kind of tied into these niches. And as soon as that generation gets a little older or changes in some of their culture, then that church kind of collapses because it was a one generation church. Well, we're talking about how to reach multiple generations. Churches need to be multi-generational, all right? Not just tied in to one specific niche. So that's why we are doing this. And also, one other point that's a disclaimer is that we welcome your comments, we welcome your questions as we go through this series, because we know something that is very, very important. You are going to be the one who knows your generational culture the best. Why is that? You were there. You lived it. For instance, me as a Gen Xer, I was not around when the man walked on the moon and when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan and when all of these, when the race riots and all of that was happening. I was not around. I didn't experience it. But some of you who are in that generation, all of you who are in that generation, you were there. And so you knew what that felt like. You knew how that those things impressed you. And so you're going to know your generation best. So sometimes when I'm talking about baby boomers or millennials, there are going to be some things that we're going to ask questions about and ask for your feedback, because you're going to know some of this information better than I am. I'm good at talking about data, but we're going to look at this information together and we're going to analyze it. We're going to do some cultural exegesis on it. We're going to bring out these traits and habits of these cultures, and we're going to examine them under the light of the gospel and how we can further the gospel within these generational cultures. All right, so that's our video for tonight. We're keeping it short and sweet, and we want to make sure we use our time very wisely here over these next few weeks. But that's the introductory video for this week on effective generational ministry. I hope to see you again soon. And again, if you have any questions or comments for us, please feel free to email us at staff@westoak.org, or you can find ways to communicate with us on our website and of course on our Facebook page as well. So we'll see you soon. Hope you have a great week, and keep an eye out for ways that you can relate to relate to your neighbor in more effective ways to spread the gospel. All right, we'll see you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.